We're going to continue to look at battles on the Eastern Front in World War II. So take a second, prepare a quad chart. This will be Unit 2, and we'll be focusing on really combat going on in Russia, so the battle for Mother Russia. And our essential question is, what factors contributed to a Soviet victory at Stalingrad? This quote's kind of interesting. General Zhukov, Georgy Zhukov, and we'll talk about him a little bit today, is really Russia's most famous general. He's a hero of the Soviet Union. And this is how Stalin is really treating and talking to one of his prized military commanders. If you fail me, your heads will roll. Essentially, that you'll be executed if you don't defend both Moscow and ultimately Stalingrad, where he sends them on. Operation Typhoon between October and January 41 and 42 is really the German assault on Moscow. German high command believes that if they defeat Moscow, then Russia, the Soviet Union, will fall out of World War II, just like France had fallen out of World War II when they took Paris. Here's a message sent out to all the German soldiers. Moscow is before you. In the course of 2 years of war, all of the continent's capitals have bowed before you. You have marched along the streets of the best cities. Only Moscow remains. Force her to bow. Show her the strength of your weapons. Walk through her squares. Moscow means the end of the war. So a lot of propaganda being sent out to motivate the soldiers of the German army to conduct this operation and giving them hopes that maybe if they do so, the war will be over. And they decide to attack using a two-pincer offensive, and there's a couple of maps that'll show this. A double pincer essentially means they are coming from both sides, right? They're splitting their army group and coming in from both sides, and kind of, if you think of like the pinchers on a crab, they're coming into the center. So the objective of this would be Moscow. Briefly on this map, you see several armies in blue. This would be a German prepared map showing Germany as the friendly forces and Russia as the enemy forces. So it's one of the odd ones that we'll look at. Several armies also here in red depicted in defensive positions and showing the lines, but really just shows the operation coming in and that double pincer merging toward Moscow. So the defensive strategy for the Soviet Union, again, this is Georgy Zhukov who's put in charge of this. They want to wear down the German army. They're already operating at half capacity. I think we've got another slide up here. No, we'll come back to that. So this is the longest operation, farthest operation that the Germans have conducted yet. Realizing that Paris is not very far away from Berlin, but Moscow is a great deal of a movement, and to support that, you need a lot of supplies and logistics. And the German logistical supply trains just fell apart. At this point in time, German soldiers on the front line were lucky to have just supplies to get by that day. And as the fall and the winter sets in, Russian winters are very, very frigid and hard to manage with mechanized equipment, which require a lot of maintenance. A lot of these tanks and a lot of these tracks just stopped in their place, and they couldn't advance any further. Another thing that the Russians did is they relocated their industrial supply centers on the other side of the Ural Mountains. So the Urals are about 2,000 miles away from Moscow, making that distance even farther for the Germans to try to do any type of industrial destruction on Russia. And then they conducted 3 consecutive defensive belts that the Germans would have to fight through. And this is a look at kind of one instance here. And what's interesting to me in this photograph, if we were in class, we'd take a minute and look at it, and I'd have you tell me what you see. What I see are primarily women digging this tank trap. That's what this is. It's a ditch with a high berm on the backside so that if a tank comes into it, it can't get out. If it does get out, it exposes the soft underside of the tank to anti-tank weapons. And generally, these are always watched by anti-tank covering fire. But we have women constructing the majority of the defense of Moscow because, of course, the men, as this is still a mass numbers peasant army, the men are out on the front line fighting. So the women would be at home or further back conducting those defensive entrapments. And then they finally initiate a counteroffensive. Once they get the Germans to stop, the Russians have to initiate a counteroffensive. So this map is Eastern Europe, 1941, the advance on Moscow, 29 August to 5 December. And what you see is, I'll stick with the Army groups. So if Army Group South right here, Army Group Center, and Army Group North. So three main Army groups forcing its way into Russia against 1, 2, 3, 4 Army groups in Russia. And you see right here, just outside of Moscow, is General Zhukov, who is going to ultimately be the one tasked to defend Moscow and Stalingrad. We see the lines of advance in this moving forward over time with this red material on the inside. And then finally, the double pincer operation that comes around Moscow, which is Operation Typhoon. We'll talk about how that ends up as we proceed. General Zhukov commits a 1.1 million army against Army Group Center. There's General Zhukov right there. He looks like definitely a Russian hero, probably has more medals hanging on the back of his uniform. These here are the Order of Lenin. The Order of Lenin is the equivalent of our own Congressional Medal of Honor. So he's been awarded this twice. Like I said, he is a definite hero of the Soviet Union. And this requires or just causes the Wehrmacht in that brutal cold to just dig in and try to wait out the winter. Here's some Russian propaganda. This means defend Moscow. So this Отстоим Moskvu is a slogan, defend Moscow, calling on all citizens to take up arms and defeat the Germans. Kind of gives you the impression of what the Germans or what the Russians were really up against, is calling its entire population to fight against a superior army. Now, losing at this or stopping just infuriates Hitler, and he dismisses the commander of the army. And in a critical, I think, strategic mistake, Hitler takes command of the Wehrmacht. That's the combined Russian army. The combined German army. And if you think about Hitler's experience in combat, he was a corporal in World War I, so he has absolutely no strategic or tactical prowess in order to continue this fight himself without some type of military advisors. And we start to see really the deterioration of the German command after this loss during Typhoon. Stalin himself becomes overconfident, and he thinks he's defeated them or he's defended Moscow. He should continue this attack. And what he starts to do is try to move to the north without any reserves and lift that siege of Leningrad. Remember, that was a 900-plus day siege, the longest siege in military history. What this allows the Germans to press to the south and focus its attention on Stalingrad. Now, Stalingrad has no strategic influence at all on the war. Hitler simply wants to take and destroy Stalingrad because it holds Stalin's name. It's an insult to Stalin himself. He needs oil to do this. There's oil down beyond that area into Kazakhstan or back a little bit before it in Ukraine, but not in Stalingrad itself. Army Group Center has been rested over the winter of 1941. It's received supplies, and it starts to focus its efforts down there after it's lost in Moscow. And the Soviets have had huge losses. Remember, this is an army that really fights on its sheer numbers, but it's had over 259% of its initial strength killed or wounded during the first part of this war. This map on the Eastern Front between May 1942 and November 1942 just shows Army Group Center advance from around where it was in Moscow to the south to where it takes over Stalingrad, finally in this location right here. This brings us to the Battle of Stalingrad. General Paulus is the commander of the 6th Army, and he's the one that's tasked to take Stalingrad away from the Russians. And this takes some time, moving down from the north all the way to Stalingrad, outrunning his logistical supplies. He's got to pause and allow his logistics to catch up with him so that he has enough fuel and petroleum and food even to continue the move all the way down south. Meanwhile, Stalin tells his army, you will not surrender. This is fight to the death territory. You're not going to give up Stalingrad. General Zhukov, again, who's undefeated and has defended Moscow already, is put in charge of the defense of Stalingrad. And this is what he has. So we have about an equal number of troops, a little over 1 million for each army. The Russians have an advantage in artillery. And that's one thing that the Russians really outproduce everybody on in World War II is their mass production of artillery pieces. The Soviets also have an advantage in tanks, and they're about equal when it comes to terms of aircraft. Germany's strategy: destroy the city. They used the Luftwaffe as a bombing force to go in and completely rubble the city. And you hear a lot of other battles referred to really as like Stalingrad. Even today, some of the different battles in Syria and other places where an air force completely rubbles a city. So the buildings are no longer standing. If they are, they're just shells. It's really referred to as to the complete damage that they did to Stalingrad. And with this all being destroyed, it results in street to street, room to room, really block to block fighting to try to root out those enemy elements. So the Russians and the Germans rely mainly on infantry rather than armored units going through there, because it's just easier to maneuver individuals than it is tanks. By November, Paulus controls 90% of the city. The Russians are pushed all the way back to the banks of the Volga River. And honestly, on the other side of the Volga River is where the majority of the Russians start to regroup for their own counterattack, which is what happens as they start to push General Paulus outside of Stalingrad. Operation Uranus is the operation mounted against the German 6th Army to remove them from Stalingrad. And this is General Zhukov again. He has massive amounts of people, of troops. He has tanks, he has aircraft. So they're going to completely try to surround the city and push them out. Here on this map, we see this is Stalingrad right here in the center, where the 6th Army is on the banks of the Volga River. And we see the red line is their final formal front line of troops, which is on the 19th of November. They've taken Stalingrad. This is where they've made their stand. And then we see by December, the Russians have pushed all the way back to this orange line. If you look, these hard lines with 4 X's in between are separating armies. So the Russian 51st Army, 57th Army, 64th Army, 62nd Army, 66th Army, 24th Army, completely surrounding the area of the German 6th Army. They have some support from Romanian armies coming in the south. So, and the operation itself, like the operation against Moscow, is a double pincer. We see the arrows moving in on both sides, coming across the Volga River, ultimately leaving the German 6th Army, or parts of the German 6th Army, surrounded inside of Stalingrad itself. Hitler tells Paulus he can't retreat, and he tries to supply them with airdrops into their positions, where they're basically in a siege-like position now, surrounded by the Russians. They can't get anything in or anything out. They get 70 tons a day, which isn't even close to what they need to maintain their equipment or to feed their troops. And then Hitler orders General Manstein to move in and rescue the 6th Army. But this is kind of futile. He doesn't have near the manpower or the logistical supplies to break in. Paulus's men haven't been eating. They're too weak to launch a breakout of Stalingrad. And kind of ceremonially, Hitler promotes Paulus to field marshal, because no field marshal has ever surrendered in combat. So what do you think Paulus does? Paulus surrenders the 6th Army, over 91,000 to General Zhukov, and Stalingrad is back in Russian hands by mid-February. Remember how the Russians were treated by the Germans as the Germans came across in the beginning of the assault into Russia. How do you think the Russians will respond to treating Germans? Here we have a Russian soldier, and that German doesn't look very happy after he's been captured in Stalingrad. 91,000 captured in Stalingrad of the 6th Army. They were all force-marched into Siberia. That's 3,292 miles away from Stalingrad. They were walked to the gulags, where they would spend, many of them, the rest of the remaining years. Only 7,000 ever returned to Germany after the war. Most of them died either on the movement or while working in the gulags. And the Germans are never the same. Constant combat has left them without really any organization. Hitler's taken over the German army. They're on the retreat, really, from the Russians for the remainder of the war. Here we see in this map the Eastern Front after the Russians have taken over Stalingrad. Basically, you see that double pincer operation here in yellow. The orange is their move, completely pushing the Germans further and further out of Russian territory.